Good evening, everyone. Just want to welcome everyone today. My name is Andrew Cedrone. I'm a school adjustment counselor here at Galvin, and I'm also the Wakefield mental health coordinator for the district. So thanks a lot so much for coming tonight. We have a fantastic speaker in Dr. Robert Brooks. He'll be talking about raising resilient children and adolescents. Before Dr. Brooks comes up on stage, we have a few other presenters. Tanya Snyder from the William James Interface Referral System will be joining us to talk a little bit about how she's supporting our community. In addition, we're lucky enough to have Senator Jason Lewis with us this evening, and he'll be talking a little bit about what he's doing to support the mental health needs in the district. Before we start, I do want to thank all the organizations that helped put tonight's presentation together. So that's the Canterbury Children's Center, the Lucius Beebe Memorial Library, the Friends of the Library, the Massachusetts Cultural Council of Wakefield, the North Suburban Child and Family Resource Network, the Wakefield Savings Bank, the Cooperative Bank, the Wakefield Parent Partnership, the Wakefield Public Schools, the Wakefield Special Ed Parent Advisory Council, the Rotary Club, the Town Council, the Wakefield Commission on Disabilities, and the Wakefield Wake Up Coalition. Last but not least, I'd like to thank Sarah Rorick for putting all this together and organizing everything. We'd also like to thank WCAT for filming this evening's lecture. After Dr. Brooks' lecture, we have a few resource tables set up in the lobby. We'd love you to swing by and get some resources and chat with some of the community agencies that help support us. One of which is the NAN Project, who recently partnered with Wakefield Public Schools in educating and supporting our community around the thoughts of suicide. So it's a really important kind of resource to our community that's out there. It's a great topic to talk to. We will also have Dr. Brooks's books on sale for $10 per copy in the lobby. So please swing by that table. He'll be there to meet and greet and chat with people as well. Lastly, we'd like you to fill out a post survey. If you may have gotten one at the door from one of our Galvin students, handing them out. We'd like you to just fill those out before you leave. And before I invite Ms. Snyder up on stage, I'd also like you to remind you to save the date for May 9th. Here at Galvin, we're having a social media presentation to our lower and upper houses about the dangers of social media and kind of what's going on today in society. And our presenter is also going to have a parent night that night where he's going to speak to parents about social media. So we'd like you to save the date for that. So before we go, Tanya Snyder from Interface. Thanks.
Thank you so much for having me, and thank you, Andrew. It's always great to work with the schools. I'm a visual learner, so I apologize. I'm going to do a little talking and a little visual. This is a rather lengthy PowerPoint, and we won't have time to get through all of that because I know you want to see Dr. Brooks, and you're in for a real treat. I saw him speak recently, and it's really great. So. But I want to talk a little bit about our service because we're a great resource for the people of Wakefield, but also we're in 50 some odd communities throughout the Commonwealth. So I would encourage people to go to our website if you're not from here to look at our communities tab and find out if we serve a community that you reside in as well or work in. If you're a teacher and you work in another community, we may be able to help you with those families as well, find services. So we are part of William James College. We reside in the Friedman Center for Community Engagement. Part of our mission is to connect families with mental health resources in a prevention model. We do that in a lot of different ways. You guys are pretty far, so I won't talk about all the ways we do there. I'm going to talk mostly about Interface this evening. We also have students on our line, and that's because we want to train students, their master's level, doctoral level, students in the field of psychology, and we want to train them when they go out into the communities to begin working, what the mental health needs are and some of the barriers to accessing care looks like as providers. As someone who was new to the field, and I didn't understand any of that. I wasn't trained in school, so it's helpful to have providers who are aware. Our goal is to provide resources and referral guidance to outpatient mental health services. Sometimes people think we're only associated with the schools because schools are really great about getting the word out, but we actually are available to any resident in Wakefield. We're a helpline, not a hotline. I always want to clarify that. Our goal is to connect people with long-term outpatient mental health resources, but if someone's in crisis in this area, Elliot is the emergency services provider, their number's there. And while we can connect people with once a week outpatient mental health services related to substance use, sometimes people require a higher level of care, and so the substance abuse helpline is a really great place to turn to. We are available Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. And our number is up there, 888-244-6843. And all you have to do is call in. You never have to show up. People will sometimes say, oh, you're located in Newton, I have to come there. And we're a helpline, a call center, so all you have to do is call us. Our process is recruitment. We have over 9,000 licensed and with vetted providers in our database across the Commonwealth. And vetted means we're checking to see if they have any disciplinary action that would prohibit us from referring to them. So we continually recruit providers for our database. It's free for providers to become part of our database, which is nice too, because we have smaller providers that may not be able to afford to be on a larger website. We do about a 15 to 20 minute intake over the phone with the caller. And we're providing some guidance throughout the matching process. So that may mean talking about some of the limitations around services or some ways to handle insurance companies or going back to primary care providers for some assistance in some areas. After the intake, you're assigned a confidential code. We're going to use that code to present your case to providers. We're never going to give them any identifiable information. When we're reaching out to providers, we want to make sure it's a good match. So some of you who may have worked with your insurance company, you call them and they give you a list of providers in your area. And as you start going through the list, you start calling people and you realize they don't see kids and I'm looking for services for my child, or they don't treat anxiety, or they don't have evening hours, or they're affiliated with a hospital and I don't need to be affiliated with that hospital, I just want services that are outpatient. So what we're doing is we're trying to find someone who meets all of your criteria, who can take your insurance, or if you want to self-pay, who can take the fee that you're able to afford, who is in a location you can get to, who has the availability that you have to be seen, and can meet your needs in terms of being a good provider for whatever it is that you're looking to address mental health-wise. And so when we reach out to providers, we're looking to match on those criteria. When they say, yes, this feels like a match to me, that's when we give you their information and you can call and connect with them to book that appointment. They're never going to find any identifiable information out about you until you actually reach out to schedule that appointment. We want to follow up with the caller after that happens to ensure that they have a good fit. It's not enough to just get a few names. We want to make sure that you're able to meet with them and that it feels like this is a person you can continue to work with. We close the case when you feel like you have a good fit, or you tell us I'm all set for right now, which is fine, or you stop returning our phone calls. At some point you got to take this sign to back away, right? But we're looking to match on these criteria that I mentioned. We respect the person's voice and choice and their concerns for confidentiality. We're committed not to just giving you names, but following up to make sure that it was a good fit, as I mentioned. We also want people to understand and advocate for the therapeutic process. I also would direct all of you, if you think, oh, I don't need to call them right now, our website is full of great information, and it has a whole teen section. It has resources on a variety of mental health topics, along with help hotlines that are local as well as national. And that's all public facing, so feel free to look at all of that. And we want that access to care is part of care. We know a lot of people sometimes have called 50 some odd providers only to be told no, 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 no after repeating the story over and over and over again. And so our job is to really hold that person till they get to the right spot. This is what our website looks like. As I mentioned, across the top, there's the communities tab. So if you're not from this community, you can find your community. Hopefully we serve them. As I mentioned, communities pay for the residents, so we don't serve every community. Also, each community has their own page, and there's a lot of local links to resources that can be helpful. And again, mental health topics and guides and publications. I won't belabor studies, but basically they did a couple independent studies on our service, and they found that people try to find providers on their own with a lack of success in that regard, and that we can be pretty helpful in helping navigate that system. And I just want to dive into Wakefield data. If you're interested in those studies, they are on our website too under About Us. You can look at all the data. But since 2015, in terms of data, we report back to the community. Again, we report back to the community non-identifiable data. So we've had 300 referral calls. That was as of yesterday when I pulled the data. So that's great. We're getting the word out and hopefully being helpful to people in this community in terms of finding mental health resources. Also, just the most reported concerns like across the country are anxiety and depression and family-related issues. And I think it's just really important that we're also helping people with some significant issues around self-injurious behavior and suicidal ideation. So we want to just point out that we hope that we can be helpful in this community to be preventative in nature and prevent really serious issues related to mental health and really promote mental wellness within this community. So we're happy to be here. We're happy to be a part of this. Outside on the table, there are a couple of resources. There's this sheet, and on the back, so it has our website, it has our phone number. It also has all the steps that you can expect when you call us, which I think can be really helpful because I went over that pretty quickly. And if you're a minimalist, we have postcards and they just have our website and phone number on them. So you can help yourself. They're on Jason's table. And Andrew's table, sorry. And who should I be inviting up next? Okay. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, and enjoy the rest of the presentation in the evening.
Good evening, everyone. I'm State Senator Jason Lewis. I have the privilege of representing you and the town of Wakefield in the State Senate. I'm also the co-chair of the Education Committee, and prior to that, for a number of years, I served as the chair of the Public Health Committee. And thank you very much for being here tonight. The fact that we have such a good turnout certainly speaks to the quality of the speaker we'll be hearing from shortly, but also to how important this conversation is. I have two daughters. One's now in college, the other's in high school, and I understand firsthand, how challenging it is to raise children nowadays. It's always been difficult, but there are challenges today around social media and all the pressures that are on our kids and just the nature of our society today that seems to make it ever more challenging. There's nothing more important than the mental health and well-being of our kids and adults, for that matter. And this is, as we know from the previous speaker, and many of you know firsthand, this is a major challenge for our communities and our society. Just in the state of Massachusetts, there are over 1 million adults who struggle with mental health challenges and mental illness, and that's almost 20% of our adult population. And even more troubling, about half of those individuals are essentially going without treatment for various reasons. They may not choose to seek it. It may be the stigma associated with mental health, or it may be challenges with accessing the treatment that they need. And of course, we know this is also a significant challenge for our children. According to the latest data from the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, almost a quarter of high school students experienced symptoms of depression, serious anxiety, and other mental health challenges. And we also know that very often issues around mental health lead to our young people experimenting with substances. And whether that's alcohol, marijuana, the epidemic of vaping that we're seeing, a lot of times there's a linkage there between those issues. At a state level, we have taken a number of steps over the past years to try to strengthen our mental health systems and supports for both adults and children. About 10 years ago, we passed really a very important and landmark law that is known as an Act Relative to Mental Health Parity. And this was all about ensuring that mental health and access to mental health care is treated the same as physical health. right? When somebody needs treatment for diabetes, we don't think twice about that. If somebody has a heart attack, we don't think twice about that. But we have not historically provided the same level of care for PTSD or depression or other mental illnesses. That law has gone a long way in seeking to change that. But we know that we still face very significant challenges. We've heard about some of those. I'm sure many of you have personal experiences in terms of accessing the care that is needed for either an adult or a child. The coverage, insurance coverage can be a challenge. Just sort of the quality of providers, getting good information. So we know that there's more that we need to do. And I want you to know that this is a top priority within the state Senate, and I think this is a high priority as well for Governor Baker and his administration. So I'm very hopeful that in the current legislative session, as we address a number of healthcare issues, that taking steps to shore up our mental health system and access to prevention and treatment is going to be a high priority for us. And that includes supports in our schools. Social, emotional health and wellness in our schools is tremendously important. I really appreciate the work that Andrew does and the Wake Up Coalition and many others in the Wakefield Public Schools. I think they do a great job, but it's challenging. We need more resources to support them and the important work that they're doing, and we are actively working to meet that goal. Tonight it is my privilege to introduce our keynote speaker, Dr. Robert Brooks, who, as you know, is going to be speaking to us on raising resilient children and adolescents. Dr. Brooks is one of today's leading speakers and authors on the themes of resilience, motivation, school climate, a positive work environment, and family relationships. Dr. Brooks is a clinical psychologist on the faculty at Harvard Medical School. He has served as the director of the psychology department at McLean Hospital, which is a psychiatric hospital in Belmont. He has authored or co-authored 17 books, with many focusing on developing self-esteem, resilience in our children and ourselves, and self-discipline in children with and without learning disabilities. In his presentation, Dr. Brooks will describe practical strategies that adults can use to help teach their kids how to cope with stress, improve their problem-solving skills, take responsibility, and develop resilience. Through engaging stories and humor, Dr. Brooks no doubt will inspire us to recognize our children's gifts while guiding us to use discipline in ways that are respectful and effective with kids. Please join me in giving a very warm welcome to Dr. Robert Brooks.
I can't stand on the stage. They're fixing this a little. I tend to walk a lot, and it's very embarrassing if a speaker falls off the stage, because no one knows what to do. First of all, well, do you help them? Do they get up? Are they resilient? First of all, yeah, you laugh. Where do you think the phrase break a leg came from before? I would like to personally thank Sarah. Every community needs a person like you. I was stunned by how many resources you brought together. I've never on my website listed one of my talks with so many co-sponsors. It took about this many, so thank you really very much. I think it's great. Senator Lewis, I really appreciate being introduced by him. And what I would like to do tonight is really to share with you a journey I've taken in life as a father, as a grandfather, as a teacher, a school principal, psychologist, and looking at when we raise and educate kids in today's world, what are some of the most important things. I must tell you, hearing that lovely introduction, I always get very nervous when I hear these lovely introductions, because a few years ago, there was a woman in the audience, and to this day, I don't know if she was kidding. After my talk, she raised her hand and said, "Dr. Brooks, your sons were very fortunate to grow up in your home." I thought they were, but it was a very unusual comment, and I said, "Why?" And she said, you seem to know exactly what to say and do. I bet when you discipline them, they thanked you for disciplining them. And she's going on and on. And I was getting more and more nervous, and I said, look, in your own home, your children refuse to read your resume. You could be the most wonderful parent in the world. So I'm going to start by telling you a story, and then I'll tell you why I'm telling you this story. A number of years ago, my sons are grown now, obviously. A number of years ago, when my sons were those lovely ages of, I think, about 11 and 14. Any of you have young teenagers? Do you think they were put on this earth to make you feel good? So anyway, I was appearing regularly on a couple of television shows on Channel 5. It was a Good Day show. And I love how young adolescents try to find something that's really going to bother you. So anytime they would get upset with me, which could happen a lot, this was their ultimate threat. One of these days, we're going to get on Channel 5 and reveal the kind of father you really are. Now, I must tell you, I never worried too much about it because I said, do you think I'd ever be foolish enough to take my sons on a television show I was doing? Have you ever found sometimes you cannot predict what's going to happen in life? Channel 5 called me, and they said, Bob, you've done, some of you know where this is leading. You've done our Father's Day special for the last 2 years. How would you like to do it for a third year? I said, I loved it the last 2 years, sure. What they did is they lined up 5 or 6 men. I interviewed them about, being a father. They said, this year we would like to change the format a little. I said, no problem, I'm very flexible. They said, that's really great, because this year we would like you to bring on your 2 sons. I immediately said, I do not think they would be interested. Well, they were very interested. My sons are sports nuts like I am, and at that point, many of you may remember, this goes back many years, there was a boxing champion, Marvin Hagler. He was already booked to bring on 2 of his sons, and at that point, Timothy Johnson was the medical editor of ABC, was already scheduled to bring on his daughter. I won't bore you with details except to say this was a live show, which was one of the biggest mistakes I have ever made in my life. At one point, they turned to my son, Douglas, the younger one, who was about 11. And the first part was great. They said, Doug, what's it like having a father who lectures about raising kids, writes about raising kids, appears regularly on television talking about raising kids? What is he like? And it was as if Douglas had been waiting all 11 years of his precious life for this moment. Because without hesitating for a second, looking straight at the camera, which I had told him to do, which was a mistake, he said, oh, look, what my father says on television and what he does at home are entirely 2 different things. So I haven't seen Doug in 30 years. If he's in Wakefield, tell him all is forgiven. You know what's even worse? I think about 200,000 people watch the show. And someone said, how do you know? I said, I think I bumped into all of them on the streets of Boston. Following. People actually said, is it true? I felt like saying, how dare you? Is it true? I said, some of it's true. If there was any psychologist looking over my shoulders from the time my sons were first born, there would be many occasions where that psychologist would say, I don't believe you said that. I don't believe you did that. You took TV away for 10 years. You did this and this. And why do I tell you this story? You see, as you'll hear, I really believe in what's called a strength-based model. I feel very fortunate that even before we had in the field of psychology, what we call positive psychology, 35 years or so ago, I started to write about looking at the beauty and strengths in kids, and I started looking at not just the stress in kids, but what helps kids to really bounce back and be resilient. So I assumed when I came to speak to a group like yourselves, people would say, hey, he's very upbeat and optimistic and on and on. I was so naive. Because you know what I discovered? I'd be talking about these wonderful principles of raising resilient kids, and then after my talk, not often from the audience, people would come up to me, and you know what they would say? I feel so guilty now. Everything you said I should be doing, I'm not. Everything you said I shouldn't be doing, I am. So I like to have a happy atmosphere. There's to be no guilt here tonight. Okay, maybe just a little. Because you see, guilt holds you down. With my adult patients, I often would say to them, we'll spend the first 2 sessions getting rid of the guilt, and then we could really do some work. And then managed care came in. I said, look, we've got 10 minutes to get rid of the guilt. Then we could do some work. What I believe is this. What you've done, what I've done, we've done. What I'm much more interested in is if you hear one new idea that you could use from tonight's talk then I think you have a responsibility to use it. So sit back, relax, and let me share with you some thoughts I have about raising resilient kids. If I could, but I'll tell you at least questions I ask parents. I'd love to tell you then one of my favorite questions, and I'd like you all to think about, we won't have time for you to answer, how you would answer this. I love to ask parents this question. Of all the experiences you've had as a mother or a father, what have been 2 or 3 of the best moments you ever had, and what made them so good? Of all the experiences you've had as a mother or father, what have been 2 or 3 of the worst moments, what made them so difficult? But I will always ask, what did you learn from both? When I speak to teachers, I always ask the same thing. Of all the experiences you've had as a teacher, what have been 2 or 3 of the best, 2 or 3 of the worst? Because what we select as the best and worst experiences in a certain role tells us a lot, as one very bright person once said to me, tells a lot about our expectations for ourselves and for others. So I am going to now start by telling you one of the most powerful moments I ever had as a father, because it leads to one of the most basic principles and basic questions I had to ask myself. I'm going to go back many years. I'm going to tell you when my son Richard was 5 days old. Richard was born in Worcester, Massachusetts when I was finishing my doctorate at Clark University. Those were the days, it's hard to believe now, those were the days that fathers were not even allowed in the delivery room. You know what's amazing now? They go in, they take movies, they put it on YouTube, whatever. You could if you were a father, you could barely touch your kid. I'm telling you, I thought they felt fathers were contagious. Those were the days mothers also stayed in the hospital for 3-4 days with no complications. They felt maybe mother should rest a little. So we finally get him home. He's 5 days old, and this was like yesterday. I'm going by the bassinet, and he's asleep. And I had this amazing urge to pick him up and press his body as closely as I could against mine. You know, I said, I didn't hold him like I wanted to in the hospital. I really want to pick him up and hold him as closely as I could against my body. God, even though I was getting a doctorate in psychology, I was such a nervous first-time father. So I actually said to my wife, I'd like to pick him up. You think it's okay? She was very supportive. She said, you are the father. I was not asking for DNA testing here, you know, or anything. I picked him up. I pressed his body as closely as I could against mine, and little did I know what was going to happen in the next minute or two, I'm going to share with you, was to become such an important moment in life. I picked him up, I held him, and all of a sudden, I thought about something I'd never thought about before, but never before had I been holding a 5-day-old son. All of a sudden, I imagined myself when I was 5 days old. Have any of you get up saying, wonder what it was like when I was 5 days old? And for a brief moment, I imagined little Bobby Brooks on the streets of Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up, being held by my mother and father. And for a brief moment, I wondered this. When my mother and father held me when I was 5 days old, did they have some of the same feelings and thoughts I was experiencing right now? You'll hear. I was blessed with the parents I had. I had a very close relationship with them. But I don't know if any of you ever sat down with your parents and said, hey, when I was born, what were you thinking? What were your dreams? What were your expectations? Most people don't do that. So here I am, holding my son 5 days old. I'm saying, what was going through my parents' mind? But it didn't stop there. And what was to happen next, little did I know, was to appear in almost every book I've written in my clinical work. Because at that moment, I had this insight or epiphany that's going to sound so simple to all of you and was going to shape my thinking about parenting, and it was going to have a big impact also when I saw parents in my clinical practice. I had this insight. I said, you know, over the years, this is all like in a couple minutes, I'm thinking, over the years, you had thousands and thousands of experiences with your mother and father. And based on those experiences, you have some very powerful words and images to describe your mother and father. Just like if I were to interview any of you, whether your mom or dad are still alive or not. Every one of you carries words and images to describe them. And then I looked back down at Richard and I said, if I have words to describe my mother and father, someday little Richard Brooks is going to have words to describe me. That thought was so anxiety-provoking, I used an old-fashioned psychological defense mechanism known as denial. I said, no, he won't. But yes, he will. And in that moment, when he was 5 days old, I asked the question that I'm going to ask all of you to think about. What did I think were the most important words a child could use to describe his or her mother or father? See, every one of your kids has words to describe you. You know that, right? If not, I'll interview them. And so, I'm going to ask you, as I develop this talk, I'm going to ask you to do this, not now, but just to think about it. You can do it when you go home. Take a sheet of paper. On one column, write down all the words you hope your children will use to describe you. Did you see the word hope? On the next column, ask yourself this. What do I say and do on a regular basis so my children are likely to use these words? I'm smiling because I remember a few years ago, all of a sudden, I love when people blurt things out. There was someone in the audience said, "Oh my God, you said we shouldn't feel guilty." I said, "I just started my talk." She said, "The first thing is, I hope my children describe me as calm." And I said, I didn't know what to say. I said, "Do you think they will?" Just like they said, "No. I've been yelling at them for years. I don't think that is the first word that's coming up." So, what words do you hope they use? What do you say and do on a regular basis so they're likely to use these words? And what words will they actually use? You see, what I'm asking you to do here, I want to leave you here. You know, I've had a 40-plus year career. I could spend days on this topic, but I want to leave you with a few key concepts. And the other thing I should mention before I leave this thought, if there's any particular topic in my talk that you're especially interested in, on my website, each month I write an article for my website. There are about 190 articles, briefer articles posted. You'll find everything I'm going to talk about, briefer articles. So, what I'm really talking about is this. If any of you were to say to me, what do you think is one of the most important skills we must have to raise resilient children? I would expand it and say, what is one of the most important skills we must have in any relationship? Parent-child, husband-wife, spouses, teachers with students. I give talks in the business world, how teams get along. It is this. It's basically all stemmed from that when Rich was 5 days old. What I asked all of you to do was put yourself in the shoes of your children and see the world through their eyes. And what we call that is empathy. You know, I still remember years ago, I can't believe it's like, you know, now about 4 years ago, I read a book, and after I read it, I started saying to all the teachers I worked with and the parents, this is a book you really should consider. The book was called Emotional Intelligence. The author was Daniel Goleman, and he wrote many follow-up books. I use one in terms of leadership called Primal Leadership. And Goleman said, more important than grades, more important than so many other things in life is, are you raising kids to be emotionally intelligent? And what did he say is one of the most important things is empathy. The ability to put yourself in the shoes of another person and see the world through their eyes. Empathy is not sympathy, which means to feel sorry for someone. Empathy means, am I really trying to understand what my son or daughter are saying? It is such a critical skill. You'll see many articles on this. So as I try to be more empathic, and it's not always easy, I also then, just tell you a little about what happened is, in my career, I've been very blessed. I worked for several years in Roxbury, North Dorchester, in the inner city of Boston, working with at-risk kids in the Boston schools. Almost all my career was spent in McLean Hospital. One of my responsibilities there is I actually ran a locked door unit for children and adolescents, the school there. And I slowly became fascinated by this. As I look back, I started wondering, how does someone grow up under racism and poverty, and yet you meet them as adults, and they're much more hopeful and optimistic than you would ever imagine? How is it that some children who are faced, and there's so much now about trauma-informed schools. I work with a lot of kids who are traumatized. Why is it that some kids who have faced really great adversity, why as adults are some of them much more hopeful and optimistic than we would have ever imagined? And I've always been interested, that's why speaking to school, kids who struggle in school, and why is it some kids who struggle in school and feel like such failures, you meet them as adults and they're doing much better in life than you would have ever anticipated. In every study that was ever done, when psychologists started to ask people who had overcome adversity, and we're really doing relatively well in life, all of us may have different issues, and they asked, what do you think led to you being resilient? Now, resilient, having written several books on this, it's a very complicated concept, but just for tonight's talk, I don't want to overly simplify it. It's really the capacity to bounce back from adversity. It does not mean you're not going to face adversity, but what it means is when different stress challenges come up, you feel you have ways of coping with it. You can underline the next sentence. Resilient people, and that starts in childhood, see problems as things to be solved rather than overwhelmed by. So you have this whole mindset there. So they asked a number of people who grew up in war zones, people who had been abused, people who had difficulty in school, and they said, based on your childhood, we could have never predicted where you'd be today. What do you think was the most important thing in your childhood or adolescence to help you to be resilient today? In every study that was ever done, the first answer was always the same. It sounded so simple, but folks, in a very spiritual way, it's why we're all here. The number one answer, there was at least one person along the way who truly believed in me and stood by me, even one person. Some person who really, I felt, believed in me. And in the 1980s, one of my heroes in the field of psychology, a wonder, you would have loved him. He died a few years ago. His name was Julius Siegel. He practiced in Washington, D.C. He wrote an article where he used a term, and if you go to my website, you see I quote Dr. Siegel constantly. He said, in research conducted around the world about children of misfortune, that's almost any kid has problems, the ones who make it have during their childhood or adolescence the presence of what he called a charismatic adult. Now I must say, I almost wish he hadn't used the word charismatic because it could be certainly misunderstood, but his definition is nothing short of poetic. He says, a charismatic adult, and I love this definition, is an adult from whom a child or adolescent gathers strength. It's that beautiful image. And let me say this, because having written books about resilience in adults, even as adults, we need charismatic adults in our life, people from whom we gather strength. So I started writing, talking about every kid needs, hopefully many charismatic adults in their life. And then, of course, people started asking me, I still remember one workshop, I'm smiling as I tell you this too, someone raised their hand and said, I like that idea. I said, yeah, so do I. And they said, just like this, I want to be a charismatic adult. What do I have to say or do? It's a very good question. And I like to kid around, so one time someone in the audience said, what do they look like? I said, I think they look like you and me. So it's an intriguing question because parents have said to me, when do you start to be a charismatic adult? And I said, actually, I don't want to sound ridiculous, but even when your child's in utero, but certainly from the time they're born. And then it's an interesting question, well, what do you say and do? The world is so stressful, even more so now. You know, all you have to do, I've been very blessed, as I told you, my career, visit schools around the country. Any teacher who has more than 10 years experience will say the level of anxiety seems higher than it's ever been among kids on that. So what do you say or do? So let me share with you a few thoughts. And again, I'll take some questions at the end, but all of this, I go into much greater detail in my articles. One of the things charismatic adults do, and you know, the other thing, the intruding thought I had is, I hope every one of you sitting there says, this really makes a lot of sense. You know, I always feel if there's any theories or work, they shouldn't be up in the stars where you can't apply them in your daily lives. So charismatic adults do this. Charismatic adults do not deny a child's problems, because if you deny problems, they're not going to necessarily go away. But you know what charismatic adults do that is critical? And I had to learn this as a psychologist. They never lose sight of their child's beauty and strength. You know, as I look at my career, I realized in the beginning of my career, when I would meet with parents who came in to see me, it just seemed like a very natural question. My supervisors actually said to ask this, tell me why you're here. What's your child's problems? We would spend 2 hours going over child's problems. Some of these parents had already discussed it with 10 other people, these problems. And then I was getting depressed. And I decided, why do we speak just about problems? And this may sound a little crazy, but after about 10 or 15 minutes, I would say, now that I've heard about 1 or 2 of the problems, what I'd like you to tell me, what do you see as your son or daughter's beauty? I use words like that, their strengths, or any of you who know any of my work, back, I think it was in 1981, I said they're islands of competence. Because you see, if all we look at when we see our kids are their problems, kids know that. And kids know when we're disappointed in them. And if we can't see their beauty, it is very difficult. I remember seeing a father who was really having difficulty with his son was like, I think, 8 years old. Father loved sports. Guess what? His son did not. So I said to father, what do you see as your son's islands of competence? He said, just like this, nice guy, I wish I could say sports. I said, no. He said, he loves to draw and paint. I asked this boy in a separate meeting, what do you enjoy doing? What do you like to do? He immediately says, I love to draw. And he was pretty talented. I then see the parents, and the mother was more accepting, but the father said, I just wish he would really like sports more. I said, but he likes drawing. I asked the father, do you like drawing? He said, I hate it. So there was a real mismatch. But then father did something. Not everyone's going to do this. Father looked at me, and he actually teared up, and he said, I feel like I'm losing my son. And he said, what do you do with it? What do you do when a kid's interests are so different from yours? He says, I know my son's strength is drawing, but it's hard for me to necessarily, accept that. So I said, you have a choice. One thing is, you've noticed that there's not this closeness. So he says to me, this is why I love the work I do. He says, well, should I start to draw? I said, we got to figure something out where you and your son could do something, and it's often more the parent making some accommodations. What happened, and this is why I say I love the work I do, and you're not always going to get results like that. The father came in, and he had signed himself and his son for an art course at one of the museums in Boston. The father called me after the first art lesson, and he said, he was choked up on the phone, he said, I've never seen my son, these were actual words, so joyful as he was drawing there. And I was trying to draw, he said, and then he left, he said, my son even told me I might not be holding the pencil correctly on this. But we have to look at their beauty and strengths, because if all we see is, what's wrong, we're going to have difficulty. But now, if we want to be a charismatic adult, we have to understand this is not very easy. Because, and all of you I think will agree with me, if before we have children, if I interviewed you, do you know parents have images of who they would like their child to be even before we have children? Are you ready for this? You're all seated. So many kids do not live up to what we hope. This can be a real problem. Part of it is every child is very different at birth. I had a professor, a psychology professor, looking back, I am convinced he never saw a child. Do you know what he said in a class? He said, every kid is the same at birth, and we shape them. You know what that made me feel? Anytime, this was before I became a parent myself, anytime I saw parents who came in to see me about their child who had problems, even though I didn't say it to them because I was empathic, you know what I was thinking? If every kid's the same at birth, your kid has problems. You know what I was thinking? You really screwed up. Because kids are the same birth. Then my son Richard was born. And I said, I think there's more to parenting than meets the eye. And when my son Douglas came along 3.5 years later, I said, wow, same gene pool, but they are very different. Fortunately, there were 2 psychiatrists in New York, a husband and wife team, Chess and Thomas. brilliant couple. And they were to revolutionize the field of child development. And I wish before anyone became a parent, they knew this research. People know it a little. They studied hundreds and hundreds of infants in New York City from the moment they were born with this question: how the same or how different are children from birth? They wrote a brilliant book called Know Your Child, and I'll explain why I think they called it that. And so they do these studies. They write this very well-accepted book. It's probably out of print now, Know Your Child, and they came to this amazing conclusion. Are you all ready? Every infant is very different at birth. One time, someone shouted from the audience, that made them famous? I could have told them that. I said, yes, but what really made them famous, they actually developed a 8 or 9 point scale to measure how infants were different at birth. Do you know what they found? Some infants are born happy, some are born sad. Some infants are born, they don't see the glass as half full, it's overflowing. Some don't see it as half empty, it is totally empty. Some infants you could take out into 2 tornadoes and 3 hurricanes, and if they could speak, you know what they would say? My God, this is exciting stuff. Other infants you change their routine 1 iota and they start to cry. And based on that, Chess and Thomas, this is why they call the book Know Your Child. You know what they discovered? If you don't know the basic temperament of your child, you may say and do things, not out of malevolence, but because you don't understand the power of temperament, you may say or do things that help, well, not, I shouldn't say help, that work against your child being more resilient and lead them to be more stressed. So they took these 9 temperamental characteristics. They said within reason there are 3 kinds of kids who come into this world. I'm going to describe these 3 kids. By the way, if you have 3 kids at home, you may have 1 of each. And I love the words they use. But you have to know your child because you can't raise the kids the same. I love when parents say, I treat them all the same. You think they interpret it that way? Not at all. So, I love their words. One child they call the easy child. You know how I would characterize the easy child? From the moment they come out, they sort of look up to you as if to say, don't you worry, I'm going to make you feel like the best parent who ever walked the earth. Easy children are the ones you cannot wait to bring to your own parents, as if to say, see, this is how you raise children. Easy children are the ones you cannot wait to have a school conference about, and the teacher cannot wait to have one with you. Some of you look puzzled, so let me tell you what happens at a meeting like that. The teacher starts by saying, what a wonderful child, wonderful, 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 wonderful. I wish I had 25 others just like your son or daughter. And you say, yes, a joy, a joy. By the way, after a minute, it is totally nauseating after a minute. But they are much easier to raise. They really are. Their temperament, everything. They feel you're giving them the world. Guess what they discovered? And this is why we have so many stressed kids, because a lot of people don't appreciate it. They discovered not every child is born easy. There's a second group of kids who I think are precursors to the kids who really are more predisposed to anxiety. They found there was a whole group of kids who they called slow to warm up or cautious. Some people have said shy. These are the kids where you have to tell them, starting even at 3 or 4, when grandmother or grandfather come over, would you please say hello to them? When they see people they don't know, they hide behind you. They seem to embarrass you. They're not doing it on purpose, because just to give you an example, I was seeing a shy, very anxious 7-year-old girl in therapy. Not out of malevolence, but because her mother truly didn't appreciate this girl's anxiety. Would anyone like to guess, but I'll give you the answer. Every day when this girl came home from school, you know the very first question? Did you try to speak to anyone in school today? Because if you don't speak to kids, you're not going to have any friends. She did not do it out of malevolence. 7 years old, girl tears up, looks at her mother and father, looks at me, maybe because I was there, and she says to her parents, don't you know if I could speak with someone, I would? She wasn't doing it on purpose. Every time that question was asked, she experienced that, basically, she is such a disappointment, and she can't even do these things. And it's very powerful. I mean, how would we like it if I'm just thinking this, what if I right now said to this audience, who's the shyest person here? And of course, if you were shy, you would not be raising your hand. You would be looking down. But we had a vote, and I found the shyest person. I said, please come up here. I'm taking a break. Speak for 10 minutes to the group. How many of you would say, he's such a sensitive psychologist there? People then say, and this is where empathy comes in, they've actually asked me, oh, so if you have a kid who's more cautious or whatever, you don't help them to be more outgoing? Yes. But as one 10-year-old boy once said to me, this was an incredible statement. I love what kids say. He said, I wish for once my parents would be my defense attorneys rather than my prosecuting attorneys. And his parents weren't even lawyers. Is there a TV show like this? So let me give you a flavor for the work I do if we want kids to be less stressed and feel you are their charismatic adult in their life. And again, I'll stick with, say, the young kid here, but it could be applied to teenagers, whatever. There's certain ways I think about things. I love, in that case, I love parents to say, I know it's not easy for you to say hello to people you don't know. It's not easy for a lot of kids. By the way, never tell a kid something that's not true. All of what I'm saying now is based on research. So when you say, I know it's not easy for you, you're being empathic. When you say, it's not easy for other kids, you're really normalizing it more. The third part of this message, and you could use it in almost any situation, is, you know, maybe together, listen even to the words, maybe together we can figure out what will help to make it a little easier. Now, remember, resilient kids see problems as things to be solved rather than overwhelmed by. The fourth part of the message, and we're not going to say this all the time, the fourth part of the message really brings up hope that a lot of kids who have trouble now saying hello to people, as they get older, it can become a little easier. There's so much research to support that. So one young boy I was seeing who was really somewhat shy, I worked with his parents, and they were great. In the session, they said maybe together we could figure out, but they said it this way, how you could speak to people you don't know. And the kid looks at them. Not everything goes as planned. I don't like to speak to people. And I don't know where it came from, but the father then said, is there any other way you can say hello? I thought that was really something. The kid, I mean, you're not always going to have a situation. He said, oh, maybe I can wave at them. Now the parents, he's totally reinforced. The parents say, that's a wonderful idea. Now the kid's on a roll. He says, but I have a question. Should I say hello this way or this way? But doesn't that sound a little better than, did you speak to anyone? We have to really know our children. See, when kids feel that they've disappointed us, anxiety builds up, sadness builds up, and we're not the charismatic adult. Now, you're all keeping count? I said there were 3 styles. The easy, slow to warm up. You know what they call the third kid? Bo. Anyone? The worst that could happen is you're wrong. I will laugh hysterically, but okay. Well, I'm sorry, what? Hellion, that's, they didn't. But that's better than one time I said, you know what they call the third kid? This woman raises her hand without pausing. She said, I certainly do. I thought you read, the book, Just Numbers book. What do they call the third child? I wasn't expecting this. Mother killer. I said, oh my God. Actually, they call the kid the difficult child. Some people think that is too negative. A friend of mine, some of you may know her book, she's from Minneapolis, wrote a book called Raising Your Spirited Child. Doesn't that sound a little better? Yeah, it does. That still can be difficult. Remember I said easy children come out, they sort of look up to you and say, I'm going to make you feel like the best parent to ever walk the earth? You know what my image of difficult children? They come out, 2 guns pointed right at you. You are in for it. Difficult children, as one mother described, they are insatiable. Have you ever had a kid? Well, by the way, if any of you have a difficult child, I don't even have to go on describing the kid. You probably came out tonight to get away. And you told the babysitter Brooke speaks for 5 days. Okay, I know this. Okay. They really, you could give them 59 minutes of an hour. They'll tell you about the 1 minute you didn't give. You can't satisfy them. They're not doing it on purpose. This is how their mind works in this regard. Many difficult children have what we call hypersensitivity. Some of you may have children like this. Some of their first words are, I can't stand my t-shirt. The labels bother them. If they could, they would go to school without any clothes on. But there are laws about this. They're hypersensitive to touch. They're hypersensitive to sound. Have any of your kids ever said to you, you're yelling? Have you ever heard that? You know, one of the biggest mistakes we make as parents, I love this, we get into a debate. Do you have a decibel machine? No, I'm not. And we try to remain calm, don't we? That's because you don't hear yourself. You're yelling. And finally, we all lose it. There's a point where, you think this is yelling? By the way, just as a sidelight, if your kid ever says you're yelling, one of the best techniques is to say this, and keep it calm. Thank you so much for letting me know. I see how much you really want to listen to me, but if you feel I'm yelling, it's going to be difficult for you. Some of you may think that's crazy. What's known as a paradoxical intervention. Even if it doesn't work, you're going to feel much better because you're not yelling. Do you think difficult children, you're going to use the same form of discipline with difficult children as with easy children? Easy children sort of look up to you and say, tell me what the rules are so I can follow them and make you look good in the neighborhood. Difficult children, they will act most difficult at the most inopportune times. You're on the phone. They interrupt you. You're in supermarkets, department stores. You're embarrassed. You leave without the kid because you don't want anyone to think this is your child. So someone once said to me, as much as I kid about this, someone once said to me, and what happens to difficult children? It's an intriguing question. What happens to difficult children? You see, the good news is this. Many difficult children grow up to be very good adults if we understand them. You can't shape them. We have to accommodate. That in no way means giving into them. So charismatic adults look for the strengths. They understand the basic temperament, and they work around, that. The next thing I want to talk about is something when I more and more I've been talking about how do you really raise kids who care? So many kids grow up in today's world, all they know is gimme, 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 gimme. So what I'm going to say now is become one of the, for me, one of the most prominent themes in my work. And it started really many, many years ago. When I was writing my first book on school climate, I decided to ask 1,500 people. Now I have about 4,000 people who filled out a questionnaire. And the first question, I'll only tell you what it is. It has major implications starting from the time our kids are born, what I think we should do to help them be resilient. The first question was this. Of all the memories you have of school, what is your favorite memory? But I wanted to see the impact of educators. Something a teacher or school administrator said or did that boosted your dignity and your motivation. Do you know what one of the top memories was? I never expected it. And now there's been so much written about it. One of the top memories was when you were asked to help out. You know what I got like the I remember when a teacher asked me to pass out the milk and straws. I remember when a teacher asked me to tutor a younger child. I remember saying, this is one of your best memories. Now there is research, if you go to my website, it's throughout the ages. Senior citizens who are actively involved in helping others, even if you control for other things, lead longer lives. See, I've been writing a lot about what brings purpose and meaning to your life. Think of it this way. When a child feels he or she is making a difference in the life of someone else, it gives them meaning. It gives them purpose. See, I made a mistake with my sons. When I asked them to do things, you know what I often would say? Remember to do your chores. I've done a quick study. No one likes chores. But I need your help is going to be much more effective. It is so powerful. I've worked with a lot of kids who have difficulty in school, and when I go in to speak with teachers or around a particular kid, one of the first questions I say is, if I interviewed this student and asked him or her, What is one thing you do in this school that basically, I'll use grown-up language, it enriches this school? Can they tell me? There should not be one child who comes into school who feels he or she is not making a difference. One hyperactive kid I worked with, he was the attendance monitor. What was the attendance monitor? He went around the hallway to see if the teachers were in class. It sounds crazy. I could give more examples like this. So what does this bring up? Again, I'm giving you an overview, but again, there are many articles on this. Think of it this way. I'm going to ask as many questions as I'm going to tell you what to do, but this is what I ask parents in my clinical practice, and it talks like this. Think about how your kids would answer. If I were to say to your kids, in the last 6 months, and I'm going to use grown-up language again, I wouldn't use these words with a 6 or 7-year-old. In the last 6 months, what I call them charitable or contributory activities have you seen your parents involved with? Do your kids regularly see you helping out? And I'm not talking about anything earth-shaking. Coaching a team, doing something in the town. It could be anything. Do they see you doing it? Because if they don't, what are their models? The other question I always ask parents to think about, if I asked your kid this, what charitable activities have you been involved with as a family? You see, so many parents say, I want my kids to be kind and considerate or whatever. But those are words. How do we translate them? I have seen some of the most angry kids. I learned this when I ran that locked door unit in the psychiatric hospital. Stressed out, angry kids who, when I asked them to help out, they rose to the occasion. We've got to build this in. It's so important. I remember, it starts at an early age. I remember my grandson, Teddy, he must have been about 4 years old. I picked him up at preschool. I never know what to ask when I pick a kid up. How was school today? Very good, Grandpa Bobby. I said, what made it so good? I was the line leader. And I am so dumb sometimes. I said, what's a line leader? He looks at me and says, you lead the line. And he said, I hope I get something like that tomorrow. It's incredible. Think about the life you lead. You know, one of my latest books really focused on the whole issue of purpose and meaning, the whole issue of what brings meaning to our lives. And one of the things is, more and more, I've been looking at this at any age. How do you bring families together? Not by preaching to kids about compassion and caring. What are the activities you build in? And if families say they don't have the time, I'm always reminded when I worked at a drug rehab program for adolescents and spoke to parents who never had the time, and now they had to spend hours in a drug rehab program with their kid, but they found the time. Isn't it better to do it in a preventive way? So for me, a key issue then is, as you think about resilience, is we want kids at an early age to feel they make a positive difference. Just 2 more points. I could go on and on about it. The next thing I want to talk about, and it's actually going to be my next website article, and you'll see why, is this. How do we help kids deal with mistakes? The very notion of resilience is this. As I said, resilient people see mistakes as experiences basically learned from, rather than feel defeated by. And years ago, it's really interesting how this has changed. Maybe it was some of the population I worked with, but years ago, often I had to say to parents, you know, you're being much too harsh when your kids make a mistake. I had parents who spanked their kids for making mistakes and whatever. So certainly there's that extreme. But another extreme is what we're seeing more and more. Parents who will not permit their kids to make mistakes. They rush in and they rescue them. My wife's sister retired a few years ago. She was a high school teacher in Westchester County in New York. Do you know she actually had parents coming in to ask her to change the grades of their kids? Not because they deserved higher grades, but it would look better on their college applications. You have to know my sister-in-law. I love her so much. I'm going to say this in a very she's a tough cookie. Very loving, but tough. And she said what I think teachers should say, I would love for your son or daughter to get a higher grade, but they've got to earn it. By coming in and rescuing kids, you're giving your kid the exact opposite message. I don't think you could earn it. That's why isn't it interesting, and that's why I'm writing about this whole college scandal thing. When a parent goes in, I don't care if they spend $15,000, $5,000, or like $500,000, when they go in, what are they saying to their kid? We could buy all this. You don't have to be stressed or whatever. It's the exact opposite message. Sometimes kids have to fall. We should never put a kid in 10 feet of water if he or she could not swim. But my God, let them go at it. You know, kid forgets. I always love it. Some parents, I think almost every day, are going to the school to bring something the kid forgot. Unless it's a medical emergency, the kids have to learn. You know, when I read the book, I don't know if it was called something like, Julia Lycott-Hames was the, I think, Raising an Adult, Dean of Freshman Students at Stanford University. Now, these were people, brilliant students, whatever. You know what she wrote about in that book? She said, so many of them don't know how to solve problems. The moment any difficulty arises now, because they haven't faced it, they don't know what to do. Some have been off, say, I have to call my mommy or daddy. And then what was very revealing, she said, I realized I was doing the same thing with my two kids on this. So we really have to think about this. What would be a response? The kid makes a mistake or whatever. I think we have to, our mindset should be, what can you do differently next time? How do we handle it? You know, one of my favorite questions I ask parents, because kids notice how we deal with mistakes. Have you ever realized that? So I love to ask parents, how would your kid answer the following question? When your parents make a mistake, how do they handle it? One father once shouted, please, don't ask that. But how do they handle it? What do kids see? You know what I wish every kid would say? Dr. Brooks, my parents are really good problem solvers. If they make a mistake, if something doesn't go right, they always say, what could we do differently next time? What can we learn from this? Doesn't that sound good? Would you like to hear actual things I've heard? They scream, they yell. One little girl said, they say words they tell me not to say. But my all-time favorite is like an 8 or 9-year-old boy. I said, when your parents make a mistake, what happens? Just like this, he says, what's a double martini? Now this is not... Do you model it? Do you get overly upset? We've got to really help kids learn to deal with frustration. And you know the other thing about this is just a sidelight, but I'm going to write about it. Just by coincidence, 2-3 months ago, I wrote an article based on a wonderful report by a group, Challenge Success, that said, the college a kid goes to is not a predictor of how successful they will be in life. Malcolm Gladwell, in his brilliant book, David and Goliath, said some kids, the biggest mistake they make is they try to get into their reach school and they're accepted, and it actually backfires. It's not the college you go to. What Challenge Success in there said, it's the fit you have with the college, how comfortable you are. So you're buying your way into colleges and whatever, and it may not even be the best thing for our kids. There's so many ramifications of what is really going on. Notice how you speak to your kids when they make a mistake. Do you start helping them feel problems or things to be solved? And the very last thing I want to talk about, we've talked about looking at their strengths as charismatic adults, how one person can make the world of difference, always being empathic, and dealing certainly with mistakes. The last thing I just want to talk briefly about is discipline. I spent a year researching and writing a book on how to discipline kids in ways where they will be more respectful, responsible, and resilient rather than more angry and resentful. A basic premise for me is discipline stems from the word disciple. It is a teaching process. And there is actually research, and you can find some of my articles on this, that have been going on for years, looking at 4 main discipline styles parents and teachers use. I'm going to quickly go over them. Ask yourself, where do I fall in? One discipline style was called authoritarian. That's the parent who says, you do it because I'm your mother and father. Often a lot of love is not shown. The kids, as they grow up, and you know where some of the foremost research is taking place? Here in New England at the University of New Hampshire on discipline styles. those kids, when they grow up, basically have very poor problem-solving skills and they're very angry. On the other side is the laissez-faire parent. They could be loving, but they're afraid to set any limits. They really are afraid. They don't want to set limits. What parents often don't realize is no child, they won't admit this, no child wants to grow up in a home where he or she feels more powerful than the parents. As a matter of fact, some kids I've worked with have actually felt if the parents don't set limits, it shows they don't care. They won't say this to them. Those kids often grow up very entitled and don't know how to deal with things because they're also not good problem solvers. The worst outcome is what they call neglectful parents. They just seem to ignore the kids and do very little, regardless of what the kid says. But then this is what I want, if the fourth one, sounds like authoritarian, but it's very different. It's authoritative. These parents raise kids in a way where they will be, in one sense, the healthiest and develop self-discipline. What's an authoritative parent? They know you have to set limits. They know there's much too much negotiating which goes on with kids in a lot of ways. But what they realize is from a very early age, we want to teach a kid. See, it's discipline should lead to self-discipline. What does that mean? It means really ownership for really your own behavior. So I know this may sound like such a simplistic example, but to give you one, your kids are playing in the family room, they don't put away their toys. You tell them to put away their toys, they forget. By the second they tell them to put away their toys. The authoritarian parent is basically may use corporal punishment, scream and yell. The neglectful parent won't even notice. The laissez-faire parent, you know what they'll do? They'll pick up the toys. What does the authoritative parent do? And again, you could put this in the teenage years as well. The authoritative parent basically says this to the kid. It's your choice. See, they want to develop this mindset. You have ownership. It's your choice. If you do not put your the toys away, they won't be here tomorrow to play with. Some people say, is that really a choice? Yes, because the kid then is learning, my behavior leads to certain consequences. It's said in a very calm way. There's 30 to 40 years of research now on those styles. The ones that lead to the kids being most resilient are the ones where there's the authoritative. It's the same thing when I've worked with teachers. I've been in classrooms, it's very authoritarian. I've been in classrooms where the teacher has difficulty managing a class. I've been in classrooms with the authoritative parent, because the authoritative parent also shows this. They know that as kids get older, they should have more and more responsibilities, and they also show a great deal of love. I know I'm saying this in a simple way. It's much more complicated than that. Writing a book about it, I know it's much more complicated. But what I want to say in ending is probably one of the most powerful forms of discipline, but it goes far beyond discipline, is the following. I've been with teachers talking about, and then I'm going to get to parents, I feel during a child's presence in a school, there should be a shining moment for that kid. One moment where his or her islands of competence are shown, where they really feel that they're very competent. And they really feel very loved. And I also started asking people this question. Adults, think back to your mother and father. What was a shining moment? Was there any that they said or did something that was a shining moment for you? That you were so happy at that moment that they were your parents. Sadly, some of the parents I've spoken with cannot even remember one like that. But I want to share with you how simple it could be. You know, the Harvard Business Review, which actually was one of my favorite journals, I think they have some of the greatest articles on psychology. They talked about some authors in there. There are these micro moments, small moments that will have a major impact on you. Micro moments could be micro affirmations where you say something that you're going to remember for the rest of your life. Someone's going to say it to you, or microaggressions where someone says something to you, you're going to remember 40 years later. I always love how some people say for every negative comment, there should be 3 positive. Might sound good, but I know some negative comments are so negative, I don't even know if 1,000 positive would make up for it. So I'm going to give you a gift in ending this talk I'm going to tell you about a micro moment. It was based on a different practice, but a lifelong practice. I'm going to give you a gift. I'm using that word because it was a gift given to me by one of the most incredible charismatic adults. I was very blessed. It was my father. And I want to share with you the last words my father ever said, because I want each of you to think about this. What words do your kids think of that you say to them? Both my parents, just to give you a little background, both my parents were immigrants from Europe. Probably they had the equivalent of a 6th or 7th grade education because they really didn't have opportunities coming over here. Right away, my father had to start a little business. But they must have had doctorates in parenting because I was very fortunate to be in their home. I'm the youngest of 4 sons. I grew up in Brooklyn, New York. We certainly did not have much money. You know what the good thing is? If you live in a community that you're all on the same socioeconomic level, I didn't even realize we didn't have that much, but you know what we had? There was so much love in that community. It was it was a different time on that. And one of the things my parents used to do, it's these small things. Maybe, I don't know if any of you grew up in a home like this. They kept a file on me and my 3 brothers, not for the FBI or CIA, a file. Everything went in the file, birthday cards, report cards. One of my islands of competence growing up is, especially when I was in the 5th, 6th, 7th grade, I used to draw my own cartoons and comic books. Anytime I drew a cartoon, my parents were wise enough not to say a future Picasso, who I wouldn't even know who that was, but they'd say, that is really good, what an effort, let's put it in your file. I had no idea if the other 3 million people in Brooklyn, New York had files. Me and my brother said, hey, that made us kind of special. My mother died, God, it's 30-something years ago now, at a young age and very suddenly. And after she died, and after the funeral, my brothers and our wives and my father, we were sitting around, we were crying, we lost someone very special. And some of you may have experienced. Then we started to laugh. We started to laugh about all the funny things my mother used to say and do. We said, remember when Mom did this? And even her cooking, which is sacrilegious. My mother thought medium rare was well done. I mean, I would say it's really like overcooked. I try to say that, and I say, I remember she one time said, it's the European way, Bobby. I said, I'm never eating European food on that. So we laughed about it just like you did. And then my father, who was 76 at the time, my father was a very simple man, and I don't mean simplistic, simple man, but a very emotionally strong man. What he went through as the oldest son to bring his family over after his father was killed in World War I in Europe was incredible, his story. So he says, boys, this is again, after my mother's funeral, you may not realize it, but I also love your files so much. Your mom really loved them, but I love them so much. If it's okay, can I keep your files going? Me and my brother started to cry. I'm looking at my father, middle-aged son's here, and I said, oh my God, he wants to keep my file going. In unison, we all said yes. My father kept those files going for the next 10 years. Ironically or coincidentally, my father died one day apart from the 10th anniversary of my mother's death. And now I would like to share with you the last words he said, and then I would like all of you to think about what words will my children remember about me. He was 86 years old. He had moved from New York to Florida. My wife and I were vacationing in Florida. And when it came time for us to come back to Boston, as always did, my father was a hugger. By the way, where I grew up in Brooklyn, everyone hugged. I remember Mr. and Mrs. Gallo next door. I hugged them. They were neighbors. They had visitors over. I didn't know them. I hugged them. I thought this is what people naturally did. That was the culture I grew up in. Then I found out some people could get arrested for these kind of things. And my father also, I wish you could have known my dad. My father, a friend once said to me, your father has a gift. That's why I use the word. And I remember saying, I love my father. What's his gift? And he said, see, you grew up with it, so you don't know it's a gift. Because he said to me, I grew up in a different kind of home. Your father could meet someone for 5 minutes, and when he said goodbye to them, they would remember that goodbye for the rest of their life. My wife always said, your dad has words of honey. I am convinced she married me so he could be her father-in-law. So this day in Florida, My father hugs and kisses me, and he said something to me that on the flight back to Boston, I must have said 100 times, I know I'm blessed, this guy is my father. But you never know what's going to happen in life, right? Little did I know those words, that hug, that kiss were the very last. Just 2 days later, my brother who lives in Florida called and he said, and he was crying, Bobby, you got to get down here right away. I said, I was just there. No, you got to get down here. Dad took ill very suddenly. And you know the denial that takes place? It sounds crazy, but I think you could all, my first comment was, he can't be that sick. I just saw him. And my brother said, get down here. I take the next flight I can. I get down there. My brother is waiting for me, totally red-eyed, and he then shares this news. He said, Dad is comatose. While you're on the flight, we put him in a hospice. And I raced over. It was the first time for me, an experience like this, and some of you have had this experience. It was very comforting. Me and my brothers each went in alone. We held our father in our arms, and we said goodbye. And even though they told me he was comatose, there's part of me which feels he heard everything we said, because it was fascinating to me. I knew he was going to die soon, but literally 5-6 minutes after we all had said goodbye, the nurse came out and said he has peacefully died. So what were his last words just 2-3 days before? And this is what I want to really share with you. He never knew these were going to be his last words. You know, you have all these Hollywood movies, someone's told they have 3 months to live, and they say, oh my God, I got to say this to this person, this. But my father had a philosophy. He never sat down and talked about it. He modeled it, and this was his philosophy. In our lives, we have thousands and thousands of opportunities to build other people up, especially our children, our spouses, other people. My father, with all the difficulty he faced in life, he could never understand if you have so many opportunities to build people up, why do we nitpick about some of the stupidest things? And the other thing he modeled was this. If you can build someone up, and it was always in a genuine way, don't miss the opportunity to do so, because you may never have it again. So these were his final words. He hugs and kisses me, because I'm ready to go back to Boston. He says, now, Bobby, remember, when you get back to Boston, if you have anything you could send me for the file, please do. I always enjoy receiving things from you and hearing from you. I love you so dearly. You're so special to me. I never heard another word. But what a gift. So what are the gifts we leave? You know, people say, I want my kids to be resilient. What is the relationship? What are the things we do? How do we help kids be compassionate? After a while, I'm sick and tired of hearing that grades are important. This, yes, they may be important, but there are things that are far more important. And we really have to look at this. And I'll end with this thought. After one of my talks, and it was really a complimentary comment in one sense, a woman in the audience said, everything you said tonight is really thought-provoking. It's something I really have to think a great deal about. It's very important. And you know, I'm always waiting, yeah. And then said, but it's not easy to do. And you know what I said, hopefully in an empathic way? I know it's not easy. I struggle with my own sons. But what's the alternative? I say, don't do any of the things I have suggested, and what will happen? So many families that are estranged, so many kids using drugs. I've worked at drug rehab programs, things, many different paths in life, but at least some of the things I'm suggesting could at least help a kid to be more resilient, to feel there's some meaning to their lives, to find what their passions are. So I hope there's a lot of food for thought. Again, if any one particular topic is of interest, there are really many articles on my website with more specific examples. Thank you for coming out, and really thank you for being so attentive. I really appreciate it.